Hello students! We have already seen what is ecosystem in our previous video. In today's video, we will see the structure of ecosystem. But before that, let us recall that both non-living or abiotic and living or biotic components constitute an ecosystem. Abiotic components are physical and chemical factors in the environment of an ecosystem, while biotic components are the living organisms, including plants, animals, microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, etc. in that ecosystem. Together, all these components interact with each other to form one ecosystem. Now, all of these components, whether biotic or abiotic, vary over ecosystem and time. For example, you must have observed that plants of coastal regions, hilly areas, and deserts are distinctly different from each other. Do you know why? It is because each one grows in different abiotic environment, that is, between different abiotic components like temperature, soil, and moisture. Thus, we see that abiotic components affect the growth and reproduction of biotic components in that ecosystem. Can you think how all living beings are totally dependent on abiotic components of the environment? Yes, you are right. Living organisms like herbivores and carnivores, including humans, are dependent on food produced by plants. And these green plants, in turn, are dependent on abiotic factors like sunlight, carbon dioxide, and chlorophyll and water present around them to manufacture their food. Thus, we can say that all living beings, whether plants or animals, are indirectly dependent on abiotic components of the environment. These organisms, after they die, they are decomposed by certain organisms called saprophytes. This not only enriches and replenishes the atmosphere but also the soil. These nutrients again enter plant body and then again enter animals when these plants are being eaten. Thus we can say that abiotic components like sunlight, water, air will affect biotic components like plants and animals in the ecosystem and vice versa. And due to this, we find different kinds of organisms in different ecosystems, and they form unique but common structure of ecosystem. So let us see this common structure of ecosystem in general. As we know, students, any ecosystem is made up of biotic community and abiotic community. Depending on the mode of nutrition, members of biotic community are categorized into autotrophs, heterotrophs, and saprotrophs. Let us understand them one by one in detail. Starting with autotrophs. I know you know this from your lower standards that autotrophs include all organisms who can prepare their own food with the help of sunlight, the very well-known process called as photosynthesis. Since the plants provide food to all the animals directly or indirectly, they are called as producers. In terrestrial ecosystem, the autotrophs or producers are mainly the rooted plants, while in big aquatic ecosystems like rivers, autotrophs are generally floating plants. These floating plants are called as phytoplanktons. While in small shallow water ecosystem, rooted plants called as macrophytes form the autotrophs or producers. Now let us see heterotrophs. Can you guess, students, which organisms are included in heterotrophs? Yes, you are exactly right. All organisms that are dependent on others for their food are included in heterotrophs. They are also called as consumers, as they feed on other plants and animals. That is, they depend on other organisms for food. So students, don't get confused. Autotrophs are producers and heterotrophs are consumers. Consumers are further classified into primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers on the basis of whom they feed upon. Primary consumers are herbivores, that is, they feed strictly on producers, that is, plants, for their food. Secondary consumers depend on primary consumers, that is, herbivores, for food. They can either be carnivore, since they eat another animal, or they can be omnivore, that is, they can eat animal as well as plant both. Tertiary consumers are the organisms that depend on secondary consumers for their food. Again, tertiary consumers can also be an omnivore or a carnivore. Now students, generally, there are 3 types of consumers only in most of the food chains, but in some food chains, the quaternary consumers also exist. Quaternary consumers are the organisms that depend on tertiary consumers for the food. Furthermore, they are usually at the top of food chain, as they have no natural predators and thus are called as top-order carnivores. With this, let us move to the third biotic community, which are known as saprotrophs. Sapros means rotten and trophos means feeding. You already know, students, saprotrophs are also called as decomposers, which feed on rotten, dead, and decaying material for their food. They break down complex organic food of dead plants and animals into simpler forms and then return them back into environment. Decomposers form an important link between the living and non-living component of ecosystem. Some bacteria and fungi belong to this category. Now students, let us see abiotic components of ecosystem. It consists of non-living components of an ecosystem. This includes edaphic factors like soil texture, topography, water and air. Inorganic substance like carbon dioxide, nitrogen, oxygen, water, phosphorus, sodium, potassium and calcium. Inorganic substances are mostly involved in cycling of materials in ecosystem. Organic substances like proteins, carbohydrates and lipids are mostly found as a part of living body and forms a link between abiotic and biotic components. Non-living components also include climatic factors like sunlight, temperature, pressure, humidity, moisture, rainfall, etc. These factors affect the distribution and types of organisms in the ecosystem. Now students, have you ever thought how they affect each other during interaction for obtaining nutrition? It is a complex network that they form called as food chain and food web. We will see this in our next video.